Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Dr. Jim Lecinski. Today's topic, the Insomnia Cookies Case, the GOST or GOST model taught at Northwestern. Now, Jim is a professor at the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern, where he has been named Professor of the Year, which I guess that's a pretty big deal. Prior to teaching, he worked at Google as Vice President of Customer Solutions for the Americas. He's also written two books, Winning the Zero Moment of Truth and the AI Marketing Canvas. Jim actually took issue with CMO Confidential's call out that many MBA programs are not keeping up with the times. He actually invited us to look at why Northwestern is ranked for marketing as the #1 school. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Mike. Nice to have you with us. Nice to be with you.
It's great to be with you, Jim.
Thank you.
We hardly ever edit these shows, and those of you listening now will see that we hardly ever do. Hey, Jim, before we dig into this case and the GOST, the GOST model, let's ground our listeners in what you teach and why. And you are a clinical professor. What does that even mean?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me on the show. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. And right. So I'm a clinical professor of marketing. Most schools have kind of two tracks for professors. One are for academics whose focus is on research, PhDs, and then the other track is for those who focus more on the classroom experience, on the teaching. So some schools call that teaching professors or professor of the practice. We here call that clinical marketing professors. And so we bring deep industry firsthand experience from the front lines into the classroom.
So, okay, I got this. So clinical, it sounds so powerful. So I'm going to give you, and also Teacher of the Year. So that's a pretty big deal. You left Google to teach, right?
Yeah.
Tell us why you did that.
Well, look, I had a terrific career, 12 plus years at Google, really enjoyed it. I started late 2005. We doubled the business collectively, the royal we, every year for 12 straight years. It was a terrific run and a terrific learning experience as the marketing industry overall went from when I started maybe 1 or 2% of budgets in digital to, now well over 50%. And digital has moved from sort of a sideshow to be critically at the center of the plate for all marketers. Before that, I was in the advertising agency business for a long time. And kind of what led me to this sort of third stage of my career was actually a conversation I had with Eric Schmidt, who was a chairman and CEO at the time, right when I started. And I asked him, Dr. Schmidt, what would be your advice for me as a noogler, as we called it, new to Google, to be successful for myself and for the company and for our, CMO clients and customers? And he stopped, and I'll never forget, Mike, what he said. He looked at me and he said, Jim, teach. Don't pitch, market, or sell, and the results will follow for you, for us, and for our clients. And so I never really had thought of myself in any way as sort of a teacher. I was as a marketer, yes, salesperson, technologist, advertiser, yes. But really, that sort of reframed how I approach the conversations that, we would have, CMO to Google, to help people understand right? What's happening in the space, how it's evolving, why it matters, and how to take advantage of it. And so that then opened my aperture to invitations to come and do guest lectures at business schools. Did a bunch of that at University of Virginia, at the Darden School of Business, then at the Executive MBA program at Notre Dame, my alma mater. And of course, I live not too far from campus here in Evanston, north of Chicago, and knew a lot of the faculty who invited me to come and do some guest lectures. And one thing led to another, and a few deans ago extended the offer for me to come over full time. I knew that I loved it, and it was sort of the right time professionally, academically, for my family, professionally. And so So I'm now in my 8th year here at Kellogg and really loving it.
Well, congratulations. I think that's a great background for this next kind of question. We at CMO Confidential, many of our guests have asserted that business schools, not all of them, but many of them are really failing to keep up with the marketplace, especially in marketing. Give us your take on that, and we'll leave Northwestern out of this for the time being, but give us your take on that because we've had some guests say a lot of business schools are just not even close to keeping up.
Yeah. Well, I think we should first say, like, keeping up with what? What are we trying to keep up with? And I think, Mike, you and I could probably find some common ground and agree that marketing is this interesting combination of durable knowledge and perishable knowledge, right? I mean, there's some things that if you and I were to get in the Wayback Machine and transport ourselves back to be, I don't know, a marketer at Nabisco in 1952, right? There's some things then that mattered in 1992 and 2002 and 2030. Like what? Like a deep understanding of who your target audience is, although now we might call that ICP, ideal customer
Yeah.
persona, right? So maybe the names have changed, but like those are durable fundamentals, where to play, how to win, that have always mattered. And, I might take issue with some people who think like, the modern, none of that matters anymore, and it's now growth hacking and all of that sort. No, all those fundamentals and disciplines
Yeah, I
very
agree with
much
that.
matter.
That
Right?
the marketing fundamentals, the customer understanding, the understanding of the marketplace, all that is you've got to be able to do that to play.
Totally. And at the same time, some of the, I'll call it perishable tool sets and skills evolve and change over time. So if, you and I were working on Nabisco in 1952, we would have really needed to understand the new media called radio or the early days of
Yeah.
television and understand sponsorships in that context, et cetera. Okay, well, we flash forward all the way to today, and now we're talking about whatever, TikTok or live stream mobile
Right.
social shopping or all of those new things. And so, what we endeavor, I'll just call it as marketing education, marketing educators writ large, is to find that right balance between the durable and the perishable. And I think, that's hard. And sometimes we over rotate to one or over rotate to the other. But finding that right balance, I think, is our goal as an educator community in marketing today.
I love the analogy of durable and perishable skills. Some of the perishable skills we would say are, big data that are now here and maybe aren't being taught that well would be big data, CLTV, AI, all the soft skills about collaboration, leading an idea through the company, being able to actually adjust on your feet as the data comes in. And we would say many schools aren't keeping up on the perishable front, and almost everybody is doing the durable, but the perishable is where it's harder to keep up. And what do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, phoning in the durable and just saying we got that. Yeah, I would take issue with that, right? Like
Yeah.
you need to. We keep learning more about the fundamentals. There's new research that comes out from academic and
Right.
industry. So that's not a gimme or a layup. At the same time, kind of marketing is evolving at the speed of the customer, as we like to
Right.
say. And so kind of staying on top of those things really takes some effort and takes some work. And, we can talk more about how we're approaching this, how I'm approaching this. But yeah, I mean, we are teaching customer data platforms. And by the way, not just CDP 1.0 or Composable
Yeah.
2.0. We're now talking about agentic customer platforms and all of these things in class as we try to keep up and lead in some cases the perishable, not just the durable.
Yeah, well, that perishable thing is really important. And also I would say, yes, as the perishable has evolved, it is actually not changing the durable concept, but the durable understanding is impacted,
Yeah.
by this data and what you can do, particularly with data, but other channels. Tell me why, or tell our listeners why Northwestern is different and how you are staying on the front end of the marketplace. And I will also say one of the things about marketing is it's where the customer, the company, and the technology meet almost first for every company. And that ability to stay on the front is super important. How are you staying on the front?
Yeah, so look, I mean, first and foremost, the faculty composition that we have is a combination of clinical faculty as well as academic faculty. And so we try to bring and respect both the durable and the perishable and bring that both into the classroom. So it's not just either or, often sort of there's, all these fights in marketing, upper funnel versus lower funnel, or academics versus practitioners, right? We say yes and, right? Or as Ritson calls it, bothism, right? Like we very strong believers in the yes and or the bothism in it. And then we apply that into a curriculum where, there's a core marketing course that everyone who graduates and goes through our degree programs, whether that's the part-time or full-time or executive programs, needs to complete. And by the way, those courses now are infused with AI and big data, et cetera. So even if that's all you get, we want to make sure that that's as up to date as possible. Think of that as the foundation of the house. And then, Mike, we have sort of three rooms and a roof in our house of marketing at Kellogg. The first room is what I'll call the inputs to being a great marketer or putting together a great marketing program. So that's customer insights, ethnographic research, market research, quantitative and qualitative, at the cutting edge of that. Then the second, of course, is our, marketing tactics. So we have great pricing courses, great advertising courses, those kinds of things. The third room, if you will, is around industry specific. So sports marketing versus tech marketing, while they all share some things in common, healthcare marketing, right? They all have industry nuances. But then, what we're really most proud of is sort of the icing on the cake or the roof on the house, which is our marketing strategy course, which is, been around for many years here at Kellogg. It's sort of the capstone or keystone course that pulls all this together. Professor Tim Calkins and I are privileged to teach that in the full-time program. And that is the course where we teach about how to drive profitable incremental growth using that whole tool set that we've just been talking about, the perishable and the durable, in order to add value to the firm.
All right, let's jump into the case.
Yeah.
Insomnia Cookies, which is a real company.
Yeah.
Let's start with the business issues facing Insomnia Cookies, and then we're going to unwrap this case using GOST.
Yeah, so, marketing professors, myself included, are always on the lookout. We have our sensors open for where are interesting case studies or business examples that, we can use to help our students really learn how to build a business, a profitable, incremental, growing business. And so on my way from my house to campus every day, I drive through Campus Town. And even if you've never been here in Evanston, I'm sure all of your listeners, viewers have been in some Campus Town, and that's where the pizza places are. Pizza places are. That's where the campus gear places are. And I noticed a few years ago, they opened a little cookie store called Insomnia Cookies. And in the window, in big letters, it says, warm cookies delivered until 3 a.m. And of course, as a cookie aficionado, that sounded good, but as a marketing professor or a marketer, wow, to be able to put your value prop in the front window, I'm like, wow. So I started researching this thing, and it turns out that a guy named Seth Berkowitz, who was at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, around 2003, 2004, started this as sort of a, dorm-based business with the concept of baking and delivering warm cookies late night to students on campus. And then after graduating, turned that into an actual business. First actual store was in Syracuse, at Syracuse University, right, on campus, kind of extending that value proposition. And so this idea kind of went from campus town to campus town and started to grow and take off. But of course, like any business, big, medium, small, nonprofit, for-profit, B Corp, B2B, B2C, you sort of say, well, like there's a natural ceiling, sort of the S curve of growth. Like at a certain point, like that concept kind of maybe runs out of steam. And how do we now get up that next level of the S curve? And so I started doing some research into what these folks have been doing. And it turns out
sorry to interrupt, just to make sure I have it right. One of the natural barriers of this is, as soon as I'm in all the college towns, have I done my value prop? Is it over?
Right. And by the way, even if I'm in a college town, like how many cookies can you eat during the week as a college student, right? Like there's sort of a natural either financial barrier, right? Or a stomach barrier or a variety barrier.
Yeah, so now we stomach barriers, and then also the pizza guys and everybody else who you may have infringed on their business, they're not going to take this lying down.
Of course. So now you have to deal with sort of defensive strategy. And to your point, your listeners are probably saying, wait a minute, I seem to remember that both Domino's and Pizza Hut now have introduced hot cookies into their delivery as well. Right. So you get all of the usual sort of natural growth barriers here. So I started doing some research, and the longtime CMO there actually just announced his retirement. A really great marketer, a guy named Tom Carasona, took on this challenge to say, like, all right, how do we get from here to there? How do we not drive engagement or friends or fans or buzz or social currency, right? But he takes the view that we do here at Kellogg is that marketing's job is to drive revenue, profit, and share, like in that sort of sense. And so, it turns out, Mike, that what they did matches very nicely our growth strategy here. We're sort of big fans of, we call it the enhanced Ansoff strategy, which is basically you can grow on two vectors, right? You can grow based on products or you can grow based on customers. And so the first place to grow is to sell more of your same products to more of your same customers, right? Like a market penetration. Right. And you say, right, but Mike, we've both been in meetings where marketing teams say, oh, there's no more growth in the core. We've tapped it out.
Exactly. People they take, especially if you've had 2 years of no growth, they take it as truth versus you just haven't thought it through hard enough. So yes.
Right. And again, referencing my earlier professional experience, like we doubled the core at Google every year for 12 straight years. So like this flattening is a natural phenomenon. Like I don't buy that. So, okay, what do we do to grow the core, right? Well, first thing they do is they say, let's introduce some LTOs, the lingo for limited time offers. So now we introduce some reason for our, what they call insomniacs, our current users, to come back more often. We're recording this here around Valentine's Day. So if you go to their site now, of course, red velvet flavored cookies for Valentine's Day, heart-shaped cookies for Valentine's. I mean, this is the famous pumpkin spice latte, et cetera, right?
Yes, which is now sold like 7 months of the year, but it's really a good thing, yes.
But it's introducing product variation, but still in your same category, still cookies. We're not talking about pizzas or chicken wings or non-category things, in order to drive frequency among our current users. So they've done that highly effectively over the past couple of years, and I'll reveal the results of their growth here in a minute. But that's strategy number one, is like grow and build the core. And so what we teach at Kellogg is sort of the 70-20-10 strategy, right? 70% of your ergs, effort, budget, focus, growth has to be from the core. Then the next thing they do is they say, okay, well, is there some new target audience, new usage, or new application that will give us adjacent growth? And so in this case, they said, well, wait a minute, there's a whole population of people who have either a dietary restriction or a lifestyle choice, vegans, right? Who said, like I've chosen, or maybe, dietary allergies, et cetera, food sensitivities.
I'm allergic to gluten, I'm allergic to,
milk, eggs, all these kinds of things. And it turns out this is actually a significant portion of the population, especially on campus college towns. So we say, all right, well, maybe we can introduce a variety of our core cookie for vegans and open ourselves up to a whole new audience segment. They did that quite successfully, launching vegan Insomnia Cookies. So there's our second growth vector, still in the same category. And now the third growth vector is to say, what are near-in adjacencies in a new category, not gold mines or hotels or, these kinds of crazy.
Cookies gold mine.
Well, we laugh, but the AMC theater.
I totally get where you're going. I think this is super important, which is the adjacency has to really be adjacent.
Yeah.
That's where you're going. I didn't mean to interrupt you, so keep
going.
No,
not at all. So the adjacency here, of course, naturally was ice cream. Right? Ice cream sandwiches, ice cream sandwich cookies, cookies and ice cream matched together. Not to mention from a product standpoint, we can now take yesterday's unsold cookies and crumble them up in the ice cream, right? So, sort of like what Cold Stone used to do on a bespoke basis, they now serve ready to eat basis. So now we've sort of grown the core as our 70. We've grown an adjacent target audience with product variation with the 20, and then we've got not the adjacent category as the 10. So now we've got sort of our setup of 70, 20, 10, and we can move that into a marketing growth plan, which you alluded to. We all learned in our days with P&G: goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, right? So the goal, right, is a qualitative multi-year, Starbucks says, to be the world's favorite third place, right? That's always the goal, right? So here, right, it's to be, college students' late night go-to for snacking. That's always the goal. And then, the objective is a revenue, profit, or share goal this fiscal or this calendar year. Quantitative, measurable. How do we get there? Right? Our strategies are those three growth vectors that we just laid out. So notice it's not to get more buzz. It's not to be hipper. It's not to be part of social currency. It's not growth hacking. It's those three: 70, 20, 10. And then the tactics that follow, of course, are the famous 4 Ps: the product, the price, promotion, the place, all those tactical kind of levers that, so often are the MarCom that people confuse with big M marketing, but MarCom is, of course, as we know, Mike, a subset of that. And then what are the KPIs against each? So it's really a nice case that illustrates how we teach marketing and how we think about marketing here at Kellogg. And of course, the punchline of this is private, so we have to estimate their actual results because they're not publicly disclosed.
Right.
But by all indications, estimates are that they have tripled revenue with this growth plan over the past 3 years, from 100 million to 300 million.
So I think this is really a really good story, but I also want to point out, when you did the model, you didn't talk at all about a bunch of brand metrics that get thrown around that aren't really outcomes. They feed outcomes like traffic, awareness, other stuff. Those are outcomes of the work. They're not like things you actually do. Is that the way to look at this?
Yes, and that's how we teach it here. Like, those are not board level, those are not CFO level metrics, right? And we talk about activity-based metrics versus business outcome metrics. You might think of these as means and ends. Like, sure, we'd all like more traffic to our site, and sure, we'd all like lower CPCs, but you don't take traffic to the bank, right? You don't reward your shareholders with lower CPCs, right?
That's cost per click for everybody. Yeah.
Cost per click, right? Or cost per acquisition, or whatever these kind of intermediate targets are. And so the one that we teach is marketing ROI, right? Which is the incremental profit, not the total sales and not the total profit, but the incremental profit that results from the activities that you are doing relative to the costs of those activities. And so, of course, Insomnia would sell cookies every day if the marketing team went and took a month off. You can't take credit for that. We'll call that organic run rate sales. It's the incremental lift minus the cost of that lift. And that's ultimately kind of what we instill in our students here. So, again, we're talking about a lot of these modern marketing tactics, the perishable stuff, but built on not only marketing durables and fundamentals, but business fundamentals.
I think that's a great example and very consistent to, what I learned at Procter and some other places. But a lot of times you get CEOs or boards or other people that they're in a really big hurry to grow the business. And I'm thinking of the Peloton case we did with Dan McCarthy of Maryland, where they thought they had a right to do rowers and treadmills when it looks to me like the marketplace didn't really want to give them that right, and they didn't have it. And they rushed into this space because they were trying to meet a stock price objective. How do you teach folks to actually stay true to the model and have the argument in the company when the company is the one pushing you to go against the model and do a gold mine?
Yeah. So look, we're not going to be able to have sort of a qualitative, I think you feel argument over this in the boardroom. We need to bring data. My old boss, Eric Schmidt, used to say, "In God we trust, all the rest of us need to bring data." And so the data that we bring into the boardroom says, all right, look, if we stay true to the core, what kind of growth is available in the core? And most businesses, and you know this, Mike, the core is so big that even a single digit growth rate on the size of the core actually results in a huge dollar amount versus if you go into an adjacent business, now you need 2, 3, 400% growth to get the same dollars back out. I mean, I face this at Google, right? Like a few percent growth in search is greater than a double digit, triple digit growth in
Right.
YouTube.
Right.
And we have all these cautionary tales. I mean, in the tech space, I mean, just we don't have to look any further than Facebook or Meta, right? When we rotate out of the core business of social media to now over rotate to the metaverse or, Bitcoin that they tried
Right.
or phones or other things like you saw what happened was the core eroded and arguably a whole bunch of that went over to TikTok, right? While they were distracted with, sort of the 20 and the 10. So this is like the conversation that we have as we build some financial models that say, all right, what would have to be true in the core in order to get us to the board or street level growth expectations versus what would have to be true in these adjacencies or dalliances or fishing expeditions. And then we come back and say, is 2% in the core actually possible? How could we do that?
Right. And in that discussion is also the implication that you take your core for granted when you make that kind of big move. And my experience has been sometimes, but very rarely, can you get away with taking your core for granted because it is such a big, profitable thing. Competitors will swoop in on your mistake. Is that what you see as well?
That's right. And that's why, being able to play defensive strategy to not just grow, but protect your core as well. Because look, success begets attacks, success begets copycats, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
one reality show works on TV and now there's 100 reality shows,
400 reality
right?
shows. Yes.
One cookie store works and now there's lots of cookie stores. So yeah, absolutely. You need to be able to protect that and not take your, we used to at Proctor call it like base and incremental. You can't take your base for granted in the out years.
So I think this is really important. What if you are doing this all right and every year you are missing on the 20 and the 10 and you're growing your core, but the 20 and 10 aren't working for you? What do you do? Is that you're making bad choices or you don't understand the market? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so now you're not future proofing your business because today's 10 at some point, right,
Has
will
to
become
become core.
material,
Yeah.
yeah, in the 3 or 5 year horizon. And this is hard. And, sort of predicting consumer tastes, predicting the 10, where can we be successful? Because now your time horizon in the 20 and the 10 is not just only this year. You might be doing some pilots and some tests this year, but right now we need that to be successful at scale in the 3 or 5 year horizon. And companies are historically not good at this. I mean, Mike, we
Right.
just need to look no further than the new product success rate, right? Is
Yes.
is horribly low. And I think this is where AI can give us all some help and some assistance, not outsourcing that to AI, but now we can take what are the past 100 things that we've done that are successful? What are the past 1,000 things we've done that are not successful? We can feed it to an AI tool. We can give it big sets of data. And now we can ask it to start to do some scenario planning, some what ifs, and some role playing for us. And this is what I start to see, pretty sophisticated marketing departments starting to do. And by the way, we teach
Right.
all that here at Kellogg as well.
So yes, as before we move on, anything else you want to add about how Kellogg has maintained its number one ranking in marketing, other than, obviously the teacher of the year right there,
No,
yeah.
no. Well, look, I mean, I would just give huge credit to both our dean as well as to the terrific students that we have. We've got a great cohort of students who come every year, eager to learn. They engage, and as we say, the best classes at ours and any business school are not lectures or monologues or TED Talks. They are, as you and I have talked, Mike, they're talk shows, right? Where
Right.
the professors come with an interesting thought or a theory or a framework, and then we engage the students and let them bring their life and their business experience. And we have a dialectic back and forth, point, counterpoint, and we sort of arrive at a collective learning. And I learned stuff in every class as well because of our terrific students, and we couldn't do that without the vision and the sponsorship of our great dean, Francesca Cornelli, along the way.
Excellent. Now, let's talk to some of our listeners out there, our younger listeners who may want to get into Kellogg, but they just, it's a very competitive admission. They can't make it into Kellogg. What should they look for in another B school to ensure they're getting the right return on their time and money, and they're setting themselves up for a good career in business schools in general, and then in marketing in particular?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, right, a growth mindset versus sort of a fixed mindset. Because as you mentioned rightly, Mike, this industry, I mean, I guess all industries, but marketing in particular, moves so quickly. It is evolving so fast. How do you stay on top of all of these kinds of things? So come to whatever kind of learning environment fits or suits your needs. Come with that growth mindset, the humility that all of us need to have in this profession, that like we don't know everything. In fact, we probably know only a fraction of everything. And so be open to learning and listening. Now, what does that mean? That means watching podcasts, attending conferences, listening to TED Talks, YouTube recordings. All of the big platforms have great certifications. So HubSpot, Meta, Google, right, have certifications. Adobe have badges that you can get on your LinkedIn. And so like start to think about, how can I turn myself into not a one-time, but a lifelong learner? And then when you're evaluating these, I would just strongly say that you need to think about whatever learning opportunity that you're going to engage with. How does that connect back to fundamentals of business growth and success that the board, the street, the investors, the C-suite cares about?
But I think that's a really good thing. But if I'm looking at business schools, how do I tell if they're going to teach me the right thing or not? Like if I'm looking at all these business schools, I can't get into Kellogg. They rejected me. I'm looking at all these other business schools. How do I tell if they're good enough on teaching me this growth mindset or not? What should I ask or look at?
Well, look, most all schools, us included, have a visitation day where you can come and show up in person and not just like look at what's on the website or what's in the brochure, but actually sit in a mock class. And I would highly encourage everybody to do that. Go take a visit. A lot of the mock classes and visits are now virtual, over Zoom, but also if you can go in person and sit and watch 2 or 3 of the professors, how do they engage with the students, and try to use that gauge of how much is durable versus how much is perishable. Because again, if all they're doing is teaching today's shiny object, well, I could probably get that badge from Adobe for $1,000, right? While I'm still working. I mean, it's a big investment in your life any time you take time out to go back and get a graduate degree. And so sit and observe it in person, in addition to just sort of watching what the marketing materials from the school say.
And should I look that hard at how the placement office is doing, or the companies that are doing that, or the alumni, or like how good of a gauge is that if I'm looking at this?
Look, I think alumni network is an important point of this. I mean, ours and any business school experience typically gives you 3 buckets of benefits. The first is the domain knowledge, and some folks will come to either like, I'm already in marketing and I want to go deeper and get better. Some people come to pivot domain knowledge. Well, I was in consulting and now I want to go into private equity or venture capital or whatever, right? So number 1 bucket of learning is the domain knowledge. The second bucket of value is actually the network that you'll create, right? All of your fellow students, your colleagues, your cohort, the faculty, the staff, those should be people that become and form a lifelong network for you. So how strong is that network? And then the third bucket, of course, is the immediate next step for you when you leave the institution with the degree or with the certificate. And the placement office, the career center, those outcomes definitely matter. Although we should say, right, there are some students who come from maybe a family business who are planning to go back to the family business. So for them, career center would be less likely. There are sponsor students who come, sponsored by Deloitte and are going back to Deloitte. So that might be less relevant for them. But depending on your situation, those 3 buckets of how strong is the domain knowledge, what's the network, the cohort, the alumni, value, how strong is that? And then the career center would be the third bucket of value. And you just need to understand how important each of those 3 are to you, and then how well the school you're considering delivers on those.
I think this is super important. And a lot of times you'll look at that and say, I don't have the time to do that kind of look. But you should, because this is so much money, so much time, and also that next step out of grad school can really launch you or stop you. So I think, Jim, that was a great way to get us to our traditional last question, which is, it's a 2-parter. practical advice. You have to pick one or both. Practical advice for our listeners we haven't discussed yet, and or the funniest story you can share on the air. You can pick one or both, but you must pick at least one.
All right, I'll give you a semi-embarrassing story and then some practical advice. So, as you can maybe tell behind me here, I'm a big jazz fan. Play not well, clarinet, saxophone, flute, listen to a lot of jazz, classic vintage jazz. And a number of years ago, I had the privilege of doing a fireside chat interviewing Wynton Marsalis, right? One of the great
Yeah.
living legends of jazz. And he was talking about some of the roots and history of jazz and all the different streams that came together to form this stew that is the music we call jazz. And he was trying to explain some of the African complex polyrhythms that go behind this. And he said, so no problem. Why don't you illustrate it for us, Jim? Why don't on one knee you tap out 9 beats per bar, and on the other you tap out 7, and so just do a 7/9 for everybody. And of course, I mean, he could do it with his eyes closed, backwards and forwards. But I was like, and so regrettably, and now I probably have sent a lot of your listeners searching on YouTube. That video is still out there of me.
If it is out there and someone wants to send it in, we will post it in the comments. So
horribly
awesome.
Embarrassed and fumbling at his mastery over the craft and my fumbling. But that said, practical advice, just from a career standpoint, since we're talking a lot about careers today, the best advice I've ever gotten, and I'm happy to pay it forward, is meet the universe halfway. And so what does we mean by this? There are some people whose career approach is that of a tumbleweed. I have no plan. The phone will ring. Stuff will show up in my inbox. Wherever the universe takes me and the wind blows, that's, I guess, what I'll do next. And we all know people like that, right?
And there's one tumbleweed that made it to the top of a massive company, and everyone thinks I can do it, but it's not true.
That's right. Equally, on the opposite side of things, are the people who want to like wrestle the universe to the ground by the horns. In 1.7 years, I will be at a level 3.6 because the person who was in that job will rotate and be out on maternity leave, and I will have the opportunity. And, the universe intervenes, right? Like you can't control the universe. So this idea to have meet in the middle, have some intentionality. What is it that you enjoy? What is it that you're maybe better at than the average bear? Right. So in my case, it's maybe advising CMOs on growth strategies, right? Like then you, with that intention, are loose enough and open enough to answer phone calls, reply to people, go have lunches, meet people, listen for opportunities, and your intention plus some of those inbound opportunities can lead you to a very nice career. But if you're a tumbleweed, good luck. If you're trying to wrestle the universe, good luck. Meet the universe halfway.
I like that. Meet the universe halfway. I think that's a great way to end the show. Thank you, Jim. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. If you're enjoying this show, hit the like button and subscribe. Look for all of our shows on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include The Rise and Fall of Peloton as seen through the lens of CLTV, The Budweiser Case, How Not to Manage a Socio-Political Issue, The Warby Parker Case, I Can See Clearly Now with my CLTV glasses on, and the show which sparked this conversation with Jim, Marketing, The Battle Between Believers and Non-Believers, Parts 1 and 2. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.